All right, so welcome everybody. I'm here, actually, my name is Tatiana Feitosa. I'm the leader for Business Agility Institute here in Brazil. And I'm here with Dave Snowden. Dave has created Cynefin framework 21 years ago, right, Dave? So we are celebrating the 21st Cynefins birthday this year. And other than that, I'm very excited. We will have the first book about Cynefin available for us in Amazon soon. So this is a moment for celebrating Cynefin, and we are very happy to be part of that with this conversation here with Dave and our community, Business Agility Institute community. We also have Ian McDonald. Ian works at Cognitive Edge, which is Dave's company, and he is the main representative about Cynefin in Brazil. So I think Ian can provide us all support we need related with Cynefin, complex thinking, and all the stuff around that. So thank you very much, Dave and Ian, for being with us here today. The 1 hour we will spend here with you is related with an open conversation with Dave and Ian as well. So Dave will provide clarity about Cynefin, about complexity. We are going to ask him questions. And you also can come up with questions in the Q&A. We will stop for some moments to pick up some questions and have Dave responding to us. So I'm very excited for this conversation with Dave and Ian McDonald. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
All right, guys. So let me start with the first question for you, Dave. I'm gonna ask some basic questions during our conversation, but I think there are some questions here that are important for our community and people here in Brazil to have some clarity. So sorry about that. Maybe for you they are gonna be some basic questions, but for us they are important for us to have a better understanding. So the first question, Dave, I'd like to bring up is, what is the difference between complex thinking and system thinking? There are some confusion with those kind of concepts. So how do you respond to that? How do you explain? Is there a different, these are the same thing or not? So what is your perspective about that?
There are also some very sensitive people on this subject who are easily offended, right? I think I'll say a couple of things. First of all, the key aspect about a complex adaptive system, which people need to get into their heads, and it's actually very difficult if you've had a European, North American education, is that complex adaptive systems do not have linear material causality. So the same thing won't happen again the same way twice except by accident. And complex systems are dispositional, but they're not causal. So I can measure their dispositional state, yeah, and I can say these things are more likely, these things are less likely, the energy cost of making this change is low, whereas the energy cost of this change is high. I can make all sorts of really valuable statements, but I can never say, if I do X, it will produce Y result. All right, so that's the key issue. Right? Now, that contradicts a whole body of work that came out of cybernetics. Okay? But I want to pay tribute to some of the founders there, like Stafford Beer. Right? So I read Beer, I love Beer. And the point I keep trying to make to people is that if Beer had known about complexity science, he would never have produced the VSM model. Because you can see that Beer intuits the concept that systems could be non-causal, but he's in an intellectual tradition which doesn't permit that. So he produces something with structured feedback mechanisms. Yeah. So, and that's on the good end. There's the bad end of it, right? So what you get as cybernetics and what's called systems dynamics, if I'm being strictly accurate, right, is it develops this really hard engineering side in things like business process re-engineering and Six Sigma. And then this really soft, fluffy side in things like learning organization and theory U. So you get this dichotomy between things which can be engineered and things which, oh my God, we just need a brilliant leader or an idealized model. And that dichotomy is dangerous. Yeah? So from my point of view, complexity is a natural science, not a social science. And that's important. Cybernetics actually doesn't come out of natural science, it comes out of social science. It comes out of producing hypotheses and conclusions and descriptions based on observations or intuition. And of course, it has no repeating experiments. So from my point of view, complexity comes from the natural sciences, and particularly anthro-complexity, which is my field, which incorporates cognitive neuroscience and anthropology. Yeah, so that's a key distinction. So we want to distinguish from that because this is a quantum shift. It's a phase shift in the way we think about business. Now you do get some people who then say, but systems thinking encompasses that. Or we thought of all the problems you were addressing complexity 200 years ago or 100 years ago. Right? Now there are two responses to that. One is, yes, people knew that if apples fell from trees, they hurt you if they hit you on your head for thousands of years. But then Newton came along with the laws of gravity and we understood why. So the fact that you were aware of the phenomena, but you didn't have a scientific explanation, means when we got a scientific explanation, things have changed. And the second reason I think the importance is different is you can't homogenize everything under systems thinking. Because if you just mean to think systematically, then it's meaningless. I mean, everybody thinks you should do that. And distinctions are really important for humans. It's what Cynefin is about, it's boundaries. We're very poor at gradients. If we have a gradient, we settle where we're most comfortable. If we have a boundary, we know it's different on the other side of the boundary. So sorry, it's a long answer, it's a sensitive answer. And the other thing I'd say is, the other thing which came out of systems dynamics, because it's got this engineering concept, this sort of computer model of the human brain. So you look at Ashby's law of requisite variety, for example, because it's starting from a cybernetics approach, it doesn't actually realize that human sense-making can be radically different. But it also spawns what I call new age fluffy bunny thinking. So it's because there are things which can't be engineered. You get Peter Sengi's nonsense, you get Otto Scharmügger's nonsense. Sorry, I'm not going to take prisoners at this point. And then you get the ultimate stupidity of people like Ken Wilber. So you get into this quasi-mysticism. Yeah. So it's either mystical or it's hard engineering. And what complexity does, it brings those together. Yeah, it says that that dichotomy is a bad idea. Yeah. And I'll shut up at that point. That was far too long an answer. Yeah.
No problem at all. It was a wonderful answer. Actually, you clarified a lot of things in your explanation. So one thing that called my attention here, especially considering that we are speaking to the business agility Brazil community, so these are people that are concerned about how all this stuff about complexity connects with agility. So you provided some explanation on what the complex thinking is based on. So bringing up hypotheses and making conclusion based on the reality, putting people together. So much more than thinking about the future that is coming in our way, is concentrated in the present moment and making sure that we can bring up hypotheses to experiment, right? Is that what you said? So I'm trying to connect this.
Yeah, we talk about, in a complex system, you can't have a future goal because you can't predict the future.
Right.
So if you set a future goal, the only thing you know for certain is A, you won't achieve it, and B, the goal-seeking behavior will produce unintended consequences which you can't manage, right? So one of the things we say about complexity is you start a journey with a sense of direction.
Right.
So you need to have a sense of direction, but you need to be open to novel ideas as you go along the pathway. which means actually maps of the present, and this is a lot of what we do, is to create a map of the present, identifies which pathways are possible and which aren't.
Yeah, that's
Whereas,
wonderful. Yeah, makes sense.
whereas
Yeah.
most systems thinking starts with this is where we want to be and just assumes we can get there. So it's like a drag metaphor. Yeah. So I think that that's key on this is this ability to manage in the present. Now, the problem for Agile is that Agile came out of software development.
Yeah.
Right. So, and the reality is that's what we're talking about, right? So you can't take something which evolved within an engineering environment where where most people are actually at least partially Asperger's, and just move that directly across into a strategy environment. I mean, it's totally naive. I've worked in corporate strategy. It's 90% politics and 10% evidence.
Right.
And so the idea you can reduce it to 2-week sprints and structured tasks and Kanban boards is complete and utter nonsense.
Right. Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have to be agile. And so if we take this, Agile would not have scaled if it hadn't been for Scrum. So the origin of Agile is in DSDM to some extent, but it's really in XP and it's in Scrum. And if it had been dominated by XP, we wouldn't even be talking about it now.
Yeah.
So it was only when it was codified into a highly structured technique in Scrum that it scaled. And this is the irony. You have to codify to scale, but in codification, you have loss. And as I said at one conference, if it hadn't been for Scrum, it wouldn't have scaled. It would have been better if it had started with XP. The X people all cheered me. And I said, but the trouble is you guys can't talk to ordinary people. So it was never going to scale with you anyway. And they're still trying to work out if that was an insult or not, right?
Right.
Now, so you've got that problem, right? So Agile became codified, and then you get the complete and absolute travesty of Agile, which is safe. It then becomes a highly structured, highly engineered, effectively Six Sigma on speed, and Six Sigma was bad enough in the first place, right? Everything is an engineering diet, everything is structured. So one of the things we need to do, and this is a big area of our work, is what we call pre-Scrum techniques. What do you do before you even think about a structured iterative method? So how do you make sense of the abstractions, the confusion of complexity before you move forward?
Right.
And then you can be agile in business terms, but agile will not translate as it is.
Yeah, this is wonderful, Dave, because I can see in the market, most of the people understand scaling agile as you have explained it. So I have safe and I want to bring what has started in software, in IT, to the whole company. So this plays again is complexity, right? So this is not the right way.
So safe was deeply cynical, all right? So first of all, it has no real basis. So Dean half remembers 3 projects he did, and he creates a structured method from that. And anything which anybody wants to buy, Dean will add it to the SAFE diagram and sell you a certificate. Yeah, SAFE is a certificate producing business model.
Oh.
And it allows people to say they've been agile without really being agile. And it relies on the fact that if people invest $4 or $5 million in implementing something, they'll never admit it went wrong. And if you're doing a 3 million project to become agile by adopting SAFE, you can, as an executive, move on to another job before the consequences are visible. And I'm actually not being cynical there. That's what's happening.
Yeah, and it makes sense because if you understand and if you try to investigate a little bit about what complexity is about, you will discover by yourself this doesn't make sense, right?
It's interesting. One thing, I mean, this is a key phrase. You scale a complex adaptive system by decomposition and recombination. So the secret on scaling complexity is to work out what is the lowest possible unit. So for example, Scrum is too granular. If you want to scale Scrum, you've got to break it down into the components of Scrum, then allow them to recombine with other components. And if you look at the biological metaphor, the huge sophistication of organic life form comes from the different combinations of 4 chemicals. What you don't do is you don't scale by aggregation or imitation.
Yeah.
Right? And what we've got to look at, and this is where we start to move into multiple methods and multiple approaches, is to allow rapid recombination of multiple methods from different sources rather than a single authority source.
Yeah. Right, perfect, wonderful, Dave. Let me move on this conversation a little bit to Cynefin. So, how Cynefin is helping people making sense of their situation in organizations and people worthwhile. So I also like you to speak a little bit about how did you come with Cynefin the way it is. So how did you come up with the 4 domains? I mean 5, because there is a confusion in the middle, right? So where did you, so I know you are a researcher, scientist, but why those 5 domains? So why not more domains? So where did you come up with that? Why did you believe that Cynefin would help people making sense of their situation, and how Cynefin is really helping people around the world?
Okay. So, I mean, you need to know that I didn't know about the book until last Saturday when it arrived on my door. No, it was a surprise for me. So the team put it together and got everybody to volunteer and put their time in. But they did con me. They said, we need you to write a 3,000-word article about how Cynefin came about, the history. And it eventually became a 13,000-word article, and that's a chapter in the book. So that describes the whole process anecdotally.
Oh.
But it started in knowledge management. And it's actually quite interesting because Nanaka, the Japanese management guy, starts knowledge management and he starts Scrum. So I've hit him twice in my career. Yeah. And I was also working with Max Boasso, who is one of the greats. All right. He died prematurely. Wonderful guy. His knowledge assets, everybody should read. Right. So I was working with him and he talks about abstraction and codification. And I started them because I was working in how do we manage knowledge. Yeah, I mean, that's my background, is decision support systems. That's where I built my reputation. And I basically came up with this concept of what's called acceptable levels of abstraction. So at one extreme, all right, if I have a conversation with myself, it's normally the most intelligent audience I get. Sometimes it isn't, and I'm getting worried about that, but that's another issue. Because I share all my education, all my experience, all my beliefs. So I've got a common level of abstraction. On the other hand, at the lowest level of abstraction, the cost of codification becomes infinite. So the thing I developed, and which we're actually bringing back in at the moment into the Agile stuff, is there's a zone of acceptable abstraction where it's abstract enough that you have meaning, but not so abstract that you can involve a number of people. Right, and that sort of links in with the current. So it started from that, right, and it became initially a 2x2, but it started off as a T, then it became a 2x2, and then 21 years ago it got named Cynefin, and then 20 years ago the 5th domain in the middle appeared. Yeah? And that was really important because it basically said there's a state of not knowing which system you're in. And in the latest development, and actually Cynefin is now finished, which means I can write the other book, which I've been waiting to write for a long time. Because the one unresolved tension in Cynefin was disorder in the middle. I wasn't quite sure what it meant. We've now resolved it into aporetic and confused. And sometimes you use new words, right? So what it means is there's a state of confusion which is deliberate, which means you're open to new possibilities. And that's what aporetic means. It comes from rhetoric, all right? It comes from Derrida. Because one of the things Derrida says, which is really important, is if you actually know what decision to make, it's not a decision, it's a process. You only have to get involved in decision making where you don't know what to do. So aporia, yeah, are deliberate confusions, paradoxes, confusions. And a lot of the methods we've developed over the years, like ritual descent, future backwards, which are very pragmatic, are actually about creating confusion so people can't go down traditional routes. They've got to think differently. Yeah? So that's kind of like the final iteration. And that's why that central domain is so critical, because you actually solve problems by moving into the confusion and then exiting into the different domains. So the function of Cynefin is to allow you to use different methods and tools in different domains. And the other big driver is, I mean, I did a lot of coding when I was younger. Then I was a general manager, then a strategy director, and then whatever, right? The thing which totally frustrated me is the fad cycle. So somebody would come along and say, you know, we got to do process re-engineering, and you do it, and it produced a lot of benefits. But then you take it too far, because you can engineer a manufacturing process, but you can't engineer customer relationships. So it would start to break down. And so people say, oh, no, that's not the way to do it. We need blue ocean strategy. So then you do blue ocean strategy. Then you do learning organizations. Then you do Six Sigma. And now Agile has joined that club. It's another fad. Yeah. Each of them claims to be universal. So one of the principles of Cynefin is to say those things we did, they were really useful. We just took them too far. So once we understand that, we can say BPR works in an ordered domain, but it doesn't work in a complex domain. Yeah. So it's a multiple approach, multi-method type framework.
All right, perfect. So based on what you were saying, so there's no prescriptive thinking behind Cynefin. So it helps discovering, making sense of what you really need based on what you live, right?
It's a sense-making framework.
Yeah.
And we talk about naturalizing sense-making, which is to bring natural science into sense-making. That's now acknowledged as one of the 5 distinct schools of sense-making in the literature. So I'm quite proud of that. Yeah. So basically, that's where Cynefin sits. All right. It basically says we need use natural science as a constraint. So we know that certain things are true about human cognition. So we know that anybody listening to this, the most you'll scan of available information before you make a decision is 5%. And then you'll do a first fit pattern match with half remembered, experiences, and you'll make a decision on that basis. We know that people don't see what they don't expect to see. If you give radiologists x-rays and on the final x-ray you put a picture of a gorilla, 83% won't see it even though their eyes scan it. So that's a constraint. So then we need to build methods and tools which are consistent with that constraint rather than try and pretend it doesn't exist. And that's what Cynefin is about. Yeah. So part of the strength of Cynefin is it's been evolved between theory and practice over 21 years. It's not a one-time production from a one-time study.
Right, this is perfect. And so in all of this is about complexity, right? So, and complexity, I mean, the complexity naturally, no matter what we are talking about, but the nature is the same. So my question here is, what is different and what is special about human complexity compared to other complexity systems?
I mean, I make a distinction between what I call anthro-complexity, which is a study of complexity in human systems, and computational complexity, which is what you see at Cynefin and elsewhere. And if you want a simple phrasing on this, it says human beings are not ants. And if you look at the basic, human beings are not ants or termites. Yeah. And one of the reasons is, so if you look at the sort of basics of that sort of computational stuff, you have an agent with a strategy which follows rules. So birds flock around in the sky based on 3 simple rules: fly to the center of the flock, match speed, avoid collision, which is also how drivers drive in Buenos Aires. It doesn't involve following rules, right? So you've got those sort of differences, right? So the trouble is that human beings have distinct features. First of all, we have intelligence. So we're aware of what we're doing. We're not just responding. Yeah. And that changes it, right? Secondly, we have multiple identities. So we can switch between identities without thinking about it. I mean, I can be father, brother, son, CEO, Welsh rugby supporter, you know, opera goer. I have lots of roles that I play, and my identity is a fluid mixture between those roles. So I don't have single agency. And the other thing is we do things intentionally. Yeah. And we're the only species which shows altruism outside a kinship group. Yeah, we actually have the concept of sacrifice, which you don't see anywhere else. Yeah. And also things like hope and grace, if I'm going to get theological about this, right? But fundamentally, human beings are radically different from insects and animals. And they have abstraction. They have the ability to think in the abstract, which comes from art. So art is present in humans, but not in other animals. So that means we need a different field of study.
Right. And Dave, what is the role of our language of conversation in all of this? So how can we benefit from that, you know, to make sense of the situations?
I think language is important, and there's a quote I often give from Heidegger, a German philosopher, who had a rather unfortunate political attitude, but if we ignore that and go back to the philosophy, he said, man thinks he's the master of language, but language is the master of man. Right? Now, the reality is language has a profound influence on cognitive development. I mentioned earlier that if you come from a Western background, you scan about 5%. Somebody from a Chinese background will scan 10%. And one of the reasons for that is in order to understand Mandarin, you have to understand the context of every symbol. Whereas in Portuguese and English, you don't. You can actually construct something without that. So those developments are key. So if you allow people to use language they're familiar with, they will carry on with old ways of thinking. If you actually use language they're unfamiliar with, so I've used three. One is acceptation, which is that's an idea from evolutionary biology we brought across. I've just given you aporetic, and it's Cynefin itself. Cynefin is only understood by about 3 million people, and actually, or a whole bunch of people in Argentina. If you don't know it, the third language in Latin America, no, the fourth language in Latin America is actually Welsh, because of the settlement in Patagonia, right? But the point is, if a word you use in a language which is only understood by a small amount of people, it has the meaning you give it when you explain it.
Yeah.
So people can't assume the meaning. So language is absolutely key to change the way that people think. And it's actually, you're taught this on sales courses. If nobody's been trained in sales and you want to make a difference, go and get yourself trained as a salesperson. I mean, we were trained, when I first became a consultant, we were trained to sell replacement windows. And we were doing software development. We said, why are you doing this? And they said, well, if you can sell replacement windows, you can sell anything. And it was really good training. And one of the things you're taught to do is introduce key phrases and language and wait to hear the client feed them back to you. Because then you know you've sold. And the same is true on teachers. Teachers do the same thing. You wait to hear the phrases come back. Then you know actually you've made a difference and people have moved on. That language is vital.
Yeah, it makes sense. And actually, what people talk with each other, what they say actually reflects reality, right? So I think
it can form reality as well. I mean, language and phrases can actually change the way that people think. It can form reality. It doesn't just reflect
reality. So so what you were saying is your attention. If you want to change people's behavior or influencing that, is you need to pay attention to the conversations, to the language. Is that what you're saying?
And also language is a large part of culture. So Welsh has a whole bunch of words which don't translate literally into English. Cynefin is one. Yeah. We also have things like hwyl and I mean, there's a whole body of these. All right. There's hiriaeth, right? Which means a desire to return to the place where you grew up, but you know you never will, but you're still. It's a very complex set of meanings. All right. And I think one of the things you need to start to understand is the language we grow up with can determine the way we see the world, the way we perceive the world, and the way we interact. So one of the things that the Welsh have in common with the Portuguese, with Latin Americans, and with Africans and with Asians is we're tribal. And so this is a classic divide in political economy between people who think society is an accumulation of individual self-interest and people who think individuals are defined by the communities of which they're part. And that's a major debate. And language actually follows from that if you look at it and you look at the way people have conversations.
Yeah, yeah. All right, yeah. Thank you so much, Dave. I have a question here that I would like to bring up. Let me see if I can bring it up to you. It's from Edilson.
I've got it open. I've got the questions open.
Oh, you have it. So are you able to respond to that one?
Well, the answer is if you can think of something which isn't ordered, complex or chaotic or confused, then probably yes, but I can't.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about Cynefin is a meta framework. It comes from natural science. So in natural science, we have three states: ordered, complex, and chaotic. And there are phase shifts between them. And then in Cynefin, we then divide order into two, complicated and clear, and we add confused. That's a human recognition. And it's designed not to say Cynefin is the way, the truth, and the life, but Cynefin is a framework based on natural science from which you can actually choose different methods. And the other question, you can have it if you want, all right? So I can put the thing down. He wants to know what's written on the shirt.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a famous Welsh hymn, yeah, Bread of Heaven, which we sing at rugby matches. So this is a play on words, which actually English is good at. Bred in heaven, born in Wales. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So that's what it means. Okay, so I've answered question 2 as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Dave, can you share with us a real, something that you have experienced that you think it was really a great experience with Cynefin? So a situation where Cynefin really helped people making sense of their situation and making better decisions. So can you share something with us?
I can give you some examples. I mean, one, and they're not all mine. I mean, I remember when I sat down with in Washington with John Poindexter, who you might remember was Ronald Reagan's national security advisor, and I drew the Cynefin framework on a piece of paper in front of him, and he said that explains 50 years of failure in American foreign policy. Yeah, because we've treated complex problems as if they were complicated. Yeah. And one of the things which came out of Cynefin 21 is there's a group of hospitals that have Cynefin printed off on a laminated sheet on the walls of operating theatres, so that people during an operation can identify what type of problem is, so they make fewer mistakes. And I'm really proud of that one. And I think one of the things I'm proudest of, if you want, in terms of Cynefin use, is the vast amount of published articles on Cynefin. Actually, we weren't involved in it. We didn't even train people. Cynefin is fractal. People can, it's this key test I have that if you want a sense-making framework, somebody has to be able to draw it on the back of a table napkin from memory. So if you can't just remember it and draw it quickly on a sheet of paper, it ain't a sense-making framework. Yeah, all these big complicated pictures are about creating dependency. Scrum actually passes that test, right? Which is why it's valuable. So because of that, people have, you see it, people will just draw Cynefin and use it to have a conversation. And they don't need to be trained or certified for that.
Yeah.
And if you look on that on the web, you'll find it's been used to explain the role of religion in the Bush White House by the British Cabinet Office. It's been used extensively in epidemiology and medical stuff and so on. So there's a lot of uses.
Yeah, thank you. So let's try to respond to the next question. Can you pick up another one?
let's go up backwards, all right? So the most recent study, the thing I'm working on at the moment, which I've got to work on after this finishes, which is we're looking at post-election reconciliation within the United States. That's a huge project. And I did a lot of work on peace and reconciliation in Colombia. So I think the projects which interest me at the moment, and we're working on citizen assemblies and citizen juries and citizen participation in government, are the ones which make a difference. So that's where I'm working, and that's where I'm quite excited, right? In terms of how you use it in an academic setting, well, go onto Google Scholar and search, and you'll find loads of examples. I mean, yeah, it's been massively used in academic research, and it's used there as a framing of problems, and that's what I like about it, right? It's used to frame a problem in terms of the work forward. Yeah.
Right.
There's some uncertainty possible. So. Yeah, this is the human perception. So if I'm an expert, for example, it may be clear to me that complex is a decision maker. Okay? So Cynefin has 3 elements, and sorry, Ian will know that it has how things are, how we know things, and how we perceive things. So if you can take those as 3 discs. So I might have, if I take Cynefin, right, and I've got 3 discs with Cynefin printed on it, this is reality, this is knowledge, and I haven't got a third hand, all right, but it's over here. This is perception. Now, if all of them are aligned, we don't have a problem. The trouble is they misalign very quickly. So if you get massive misalignment, as for example happened to the Catholic Church in medieval Europe, then when the reset happens, the reset is traumatic. Yeah. So a lot of Cynefin methods and tools as to increases the interaction of perception with knowledge with reality, so that you don't get those radical resets. Right? Right. So the issue is people can be perceptually in different spaces, even if reality is one. Yeah. So I've answered that one. Yeah, COVID is interesting. I mean, it's actually been quite good for us as a company. Because, you know, we're the experts in complexity and chaos, and kind of like, well, all of a sudden there aren't many games in town. I think there's some interesting things you see on COVID, and there's a key complexity principle which says most human systems are context sensitive, not context free. So context matters. So you see people in the health sector at the moment who are saying, well, look, COVID came along and all of a sudden we got rid of the bureaucracy. We did things in hours, which used to take months. Isn't this wonderful? Can't we carry on doing it? And I'm sitting there saying, well, you can't, because you have to have an epidemic every 3 weeks to do that. Because what you do when you move into what's the liminal domain of chaos is people are prepared to do things that they won't do in positions of stability. So the issue is, what do you take which is good about that, and how do you then expand that into a very different context of the way it works? Now, COVID, I think, has triggered a phase shift in the way we think about the world. And one of the programs we're trying to work on at the moment, and I need to be careful what I say about this, is how we link COVID with Black Lives Matter with climate change. Because the awareness of vulnerability that COVID has produced is important. Now, I don't want to depress people on this, but we know that COVID isn't going to be over until 2022. Which means we're going to get a massive mental health breakdown in worldwide in January, February, when people realize that. Yeah. And that's something we're actually building software for and building systems for at the moment. If anybody's interested, we're looking for more partners on that, particularly academic ones. But it's not the worst pandemic I'll see in my lifetime. That's what's scary, right? This is almost like, COVID is almost like a gift of God to wake us up, because there's worse coming, right? And I think that's what we're starting to get people realize at the moment. And that requires a much more sophisticated framing of problems than came out of cybernetics, which has dominated the last 4 or 5 decades.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think I answered that one.
These are very good reflections. Yeah, thank you, Dave. So I would like to invite Ian for this conversation. Yeah, can you hear us?
Hello, hello.
Yeah, so I would like you to, to spend some minutes with us and maybe sharing something about Cynefin here in Brazil. So how Cynefin is working, not working, but helping people here in Brazil, in the companies, and what you have been doing. Share with us a little bit about your perspective with Cynefin.
Sure. I've been working, I first heard of a SenseMaker, which was the tool that Project Event uses. And then diving into that, I end up meeting Dave and understanding Cynefin. And for the last few years, I've also been doing Cynefin training courses here in Brazil. And it's really interesting. I mean, the projects are amazing. And we were on a Cynefin retreat that's happening this week. We were a group of people discussing how Cynefin gives the ability to give you the tools on an individual level to be less arrogant. You begin to realize that you don't have all the answers.
That's wonderful.
Although there's wonderful, there's a lot of science behind it. When there's this aha moment, like, oh, I don't know, and I better be careful. So you begin to realize that there are many situations that you're walking in the hills, and it's much more misty than you thought it was. So running and thinking that you're going to get to the top of the hill at a certain time is not the safest route. So on an individual level, that seems to be a common thing that's happened with the courses here. And of course, then when you go to how people work with teams and how leaders look at their own teams, there seems to be this other perception of sense making needs to happen, because the old way, I think Dave has a great, what got you here won't get you out kind of thing, So people begin to realize that, all the methods and the tools and the training and their certificates and everything that have got them to where they are is not necessarily the tools they're going to need to getting out. And then they need others. They need the human sensor network in place. They need the capacity that humans have to live and breathe complexity to help them get out. It's not going to be their MBA on their own. They're not going to be the Captain Americas, the single heroes. So that seems to be these sort of aha moments that we're getting out of people in different circumstances and from very wide range of fields of sort of study and working in governments and organizations, and also people taking this to their own personal lives as well. So that's the kind of things we've been seeing here in Brazil and around the world as well. It seems to be a general approach to what's that reaction, that for those first, and then people will usually fall in love and start studying and getting more into the deep sort of the understanding of all the domains and everything like that. But that seems to be the first reaction that people get, which is very positive.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, very inspiring, everything you have shared with us. So Dave, there are a couple of questions here for you. I'm sure we won't have enough time to respond to all of them. So maybe we'll be able to respond one or two. I can pick up, or you can do it. Maybe you can select the best question.
I was just about to type an answer to something, and then I typed answer live, so I think I better do that, which is the question from Giselle about, would you say about a research that includes an overlap between Cynefin and Godot perspective scenario analysis? And the answer is, I think it would be extremely interesting, because one of the things Cynefin does is to say different techniques work in different domains. So traditional 4-box forces and factors scenario planning works in order. I would say in the complex domain, we do micro scenario planning over multicultural human sensor networks. So I prefer to get 5,000 people from different backgrounds to assess a situation and produce micro scenarios, and then look for maps on that, which is actually quite easy, than highly structured tasks. So I think kind of like Godot is interesting, but I think we can move on from that, right? But the mapping is quite interesting. And you can almost get like, somebody wrote an article about Vike and Vac, Carl Vike and Vac, who created scenario planning. There is an interesting article which looks at some of the more progressive scenario planning tools and Cynefin. So if somebody's going to do that academically, I'd certainly be interested. Yeah. So, okay, so I've chose one, so you chose the next, you choose the next one.
So let me just ask a question, you know, based on what you have said. So how people can, you know, create a great team to work with Cynefin? I think, as you said, bringing different perspectives to the discussion is a great thing to keep in mind. But what are the other, you know, things that you need to pay attention and you need to have in mind to create a good team to work with Cynefin in organizations?
Yeah, that's, I mean, team formation is interesting. I mean, we've been working on three things, right, at the moment, which are relevant here. One is the thing called social network stimulation, which is designed to build the informal network so that everybody is within 2 phone calls of everybody else based on having worked together on a project. Because, and that's quite easy to do. If you've got, it takes about 18 months. You then build your formal systems from existing informal networks where trust is already built in. So that's an arse about face thing. You stop trying to build things top down. You find things which are working and you magnify them, right? So that's one technique. The other technique we're using is trios, which is where you put three roles together in multiple parallel processes. So in software development, for example, we put a young coder together with a systems architect, together with a user trained to talk to IT people. And that 3 people have to find new solutions. But we use 20 or 30 trios in parallel. And then the results feed into Scrum. And that's an organizational design principle. And then there's this key thing called a crew, which is much better than a team. So you see this in civil emergencies and military. In a crew, people are trained in role and how the roles communicate. So you don't have to go through team formation.
Oh, that's nice.
And the cognitive capacity of a crew is better than the cognitive accumulation of all the individuals.
Yeah, yeah.
And so those are 3 new methods which are being approached for teams. But if you want to take something really simple, simply draw the Cynefin framework on the flip chart and ask people to put the current problems in it and see where they place them.
Yeah, and of course, in order to understand the patterns of what you are, you know, getting from people, of course, we can count on tools for that, right? I mean, to find the patterns of what people are bringing up and where the problems are really concentrated and what people are talking about, right?
Yeah, the nature of the problem, because if you know a problem is complex, you have this huge release of energy because you stop trying to define what the solution is. Instead of that, you say, okay, who's got an idea which might work? And then you test each idea for coherence, and the ones which have coherence, you run experiments on. So it makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, because yeah, as you said, you stop doing things that don't make sense, right? Because if you know that the problem is complex, you know that you need to bring up hypotheses because there is no knowledge to resolve the problem, there is no solution for the problem. You can make a better decision based on what to do, right? I think this is what you were
and that's the critical thing is parallelism. That's why Scrum is not a complex technique, because it does one thing iteratively.
Right.
Yeah, the key thing about complexity is you experiment in parallel based on incompatible hypotheses. And the experiments actually change the space, so the solution becomes more visible.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dave, we have only 7 minutes with you. Unfortunately, the conversation is, wonderful, especially for me. So I'd like to spend this last 7 minutes, sorry for all the questions. I don't know if we have a way to come back to people and providing them some response or some clarity on where to go to have those questions responded.
Well, Ian can respond in Portuguese, all right, so that will help. We actually run quick start training in both the software and in the methods, so that's a way to learn about it, and those are now available online, or just read, right? And I always try and answer emails. I don't promise to answer them quickly, but I've learned something over the years. Never get proud about talking to people, because you never know who's going to ask an interesting question.
Yeah, I can handle that.
And
Actually,
too many people put filters. Yeah.
Yeah, I can handle that. I can get all the questions, and maybe I can have contact you, and maybe you can find a way to help people. And maybe in the next step we can contact you for those you have no clarity, Dave. How does it sound for you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. That sounds fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot on the cognitive edge side. Dave is an avid writer and blogger, so there's a lot of material to read through.
Thank you. Yeah,
especially in English. Not so much in Portuguese. There's a lot in English, of course, but we're getting there. The book will be translated hopefully soon as well.
Yeah, and all for everybody here that is listening to us. We will also contact you other than trying to respond to questions, but sharing information. I can get those information with you on where to get, where to get, to go deeply in Cynefin, and where to go. And the Cognitive Edge website is, there are a lot of great stuff there. So maybe you can help us guiding some direction on where to, to do some researches. So, yeah, and Dave, I would like to spend these last 5 minutes, actually the last 4, because the last minute I want to share some information with everyone about our next event and something like that. But for the last 4 minutes, I'd like both of you to share with everybody that is listening to us whatever you think it is important for people to keep in mind at this moment about complexity or Cynefin or both things. So what is really important for people to keep in mind about everything we are talking about? Dave, you go first.
Oh, I think key thing to understand is that different techniques work in different domains and different spaces, but not all techniques are equally valid. I'll introduce one new word on this, which is called coherence. So I can say that evolutionary theory is probably wrong, but it's coherent to the facts. Whereas young Earth creationism is incoherent. There's no point in pursuing it. So the concept of coherence is really important to complexity, because it indicates which journeys you should start and which you should eliminate. So having an approach based on multiple methods doesn't mean that all methods are equally valid or all methods are right, because a lot of them are actually basically wrong. Yeah, and that's the boundary issue. So that's what I'd leave you with, I think.
Okay, thank you, Dave. What about you, Ian?
I think just to bring in, I don't know if we went over it quickly, but Cynefin is a strange word, especially here in Brazil. It's a new word, and its origins, the meaning of a place of multiple belongings. Is such an interesting concept that you can belong to different places at the same time. So this idea that the framework is there, that you come before the framework. So it's not a categorization framework, and that you can actually, depending on the context of what you're looking at or looking as, you can be in different places at different times. So the sense of this organicness of being in multiple places at the same time, or just being fluid and moving, throughout the day or throughout the year, or whatever, is a wonderful sort of framework to have in mind, and as a tool as well, of course.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I love that. So you are the boss, right? The framework is not the boss, right? Is that this is what you were saying, right?
I don't know about the boss. I think the framework.
The framework is a constraint. It's not the boss, but it's a constraint.
All right. Okay.
It might let you know if you're doing something wrong, but also might let you know if you're doing something right. So it's a good ally, I would say.
Okay. All right. Got it. Okay. All right, guys. So let me just share a few information with the audience really quickly, and then we can, say, leave the last message and say goodbye to everyone. For everyone that is listening to us. Here are our next events in Business Agility Institute Brazil. So in November, we have 3 great events. One of them is with Paulo Caroli about MVP and Lean Inception. We have another one with HR with Pia Maria. On the 3rd, we have one event about visual thinking and how it relates with business agility with Ana Palu. And in December, we have an event about metrics with Rafael Albino. I'm going to share with you in the chat real quick some important links. Yeah, feel free to share if you have, you know, links about cognitive edge or any link you'd like to share with everyone. Feel free to do it.
We don't have the dates yet, but the end of January, we're going to have a virtual Cynefin base camp, which is like the foundations course in Portuguese in the end of January. So, but I'll send you the link when we have the exact dates.
Great, wonderful. So I have just shared 3 links. This is the links that I have shared is related with our intranet, our Slack, where we connect with our community, our LinkedIn webs page, and the last one, which is really important, is a survey that I really would like to ask you all to respond. It's real quick. So you can get 1 minute, you spend 1 minute only to respond to that. So this is important for us to know how was your experience with us, with myself, Dave, and Ian today. Okay, so thank you so much, Dave, and thank you, Ian, for everything you have shared with us, dedication, the availability to talk with us, to provide so wonderful information to our community. So I hope you can get connected soon, especially with you, Ian, since we are here in Brazil. So I hope we can, you know, do a lot of great things together. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ian. Thank Dave.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. They were great. I think we've answered them all now as well. So.
Oh, great, great. Less work for us, yeah. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Have a good afternoon. Bye.